Hey, second grade, it's time for chapter 15 of The Indian in the Cupboard. Underfloor Adventure. Omri and Patrick decided they must take it in turns to sit up all night with Boone. This was going to be tricky because of light showing under the door, but Omri unearthed the lopsided remains of a candle he had made himself from a candle making kit. We can put it behind the dressing up crate, then the light won't show. They got into their pajamas. Patrick was supposed to be sleeping on a folded bed, so they got it ready to avoid arousing suspicion. When Omri's mother came in to kiss them goodnight, they were both in bed, apparently reading. The fact that Omri was reading in semi darkness was nothing unusual. She was always at him about it. Oh, Omri, why won't you switch your bedside light on? You'll ruin your eyes. It doesn't work, said Omri promptly. Yes, it does. Daddy fixed it this morning. You know what was wrong with it? What? Asked Omri impatiently, wishing for once that she would go. That wretched rat of Gillen's had made a nest under the floorboards and lined it with bits of insulation it gnawed off the wires. No wonder it didn't electrocute itself. Omri sat up sharply. Do you mean it's got loose? His mother gave a lopsided smile. Where have you been keeping yourself? It's been loose since last night. Haven't you noticed Gillen frantically looking for it? It seems to have taken up residence under your bed. Under my bed? Omri yelled, leaping out of it and dropping to his knees. It's no use looking for it. I mean, right under the floor. Daddy caught a glimpse of it today when he had the boards up, but he couldn't catch it, of course. It's a matter of waiting till it comes out for food, and then, but Omri wasn't listening. A rat! That was all they needed. Mom, we've got to get it. We've got to. Why? You're not scared of it, are you? Me? Scared of that stupid rat? Of course not. But we've got to catch it, said Omri desperately. He felt wild and furious. How could Gillen have let the thing go? The perils that a rat presented to his little men simply turned his blood cold. And why, of all rooms in the house, should it have chosen this? He was tearing frantically at the edge of the carpet, trying to pull it back when his mother hiked him to his feet. Omri, that carpet and those floorboards have been taken up once today. They've been put back once and everything tidied up. Rat or no rat, I'm not going through it all again tonight. Now, get into bed and go to sleep. But into bed, I said. Now. When she used that tone, there was no arguing with her. Omri got into bed, was kissed, and watched the light go off and the door close. As soon as her footsteps had faded, he leaped up again, and so did Patrick. Now, we must definitely stay awake all night. We mustn't close our eyes for a moment, said Omri. He was hunting through his ancient collection of book matches for one out of which his father had not cut the matches. At last, he found one and lit the candle. They very gently moved Boone's bed out of hiding onto the bedside table, set the candle beside it, and sat one on each side, watching Boone's dreadfully ill-looking face. The pink square of Band-Aid moved frantically up and down as he breathed. You could hardly see it. It was like watching the long hand of a clock moving. Only the strongest concentration enabled them to detect the faint motion. Hadn't we better move the seed box up here too? Whispered Patrick. In the moment when Little Bear had shot Boone, Omri had almost been angry enough to have fed him to the rat. But now his fury had cooled. He certainly didn't want anything awful to happen to him. Yes, let's. Between them, they cleared a place on the table and lifted the seed box with its longhouse, fireplace, and hitching posts up out of reach of the prowling rodent. Careful, don't frighten the horses. The horses, however, were getting used to being carried about and hardly looked up from munching their little piles of grass cuttings. There was no sign of life from the longhouse. There followed a timeless period of just sitting silently, their eyes fixed on Boone's still figure in the flickering candlelight. Omri began to feel lightheaded after a bit. The candle flame went fuzzy, and Boone's body seemed to vibrate as he stared at it. At the very back of his mind, something else was nagging. He didn't ask himself what this was because he had a superstitious feeling that if he let his mind wander from Boone, even for a minute, Boone would slip away into death. It was as if only Omri's will and Patrick's were keeping that tiny, fragile heart beating. Suddenly, though, a thought, like a landscape lit up by lightning, flashed to the forefront of Omri's brain. He sat up, his eyes wide open, and his breath held. Patrick! Patrick jumped. He'd been half asleep. What? The key. I know where it is. Where? Where? Right under my feet. It must have dropped through the floorboards when Dad opened them. There's nowhere else it could be. Patrick gazed at him in admiration, but also in dismay. How are we going to get it? He whispered. We'll have to take up the carpet first. Maybe Dad didn't nail all the boards down. Moving very quietly, they managed to lift one corner of Omri's bed and kick back the edge of the carpet from underneath. Another bit was under the bedside table leg, and that was tricky, but they shifted it between them in the end. Carefully, they folded the corner of carpet back on itself, exposing the boards. Omri then stuck his fingers down the narrow crack at the ends of the boards, one after another, testing to see if they could be lifted. Only one of them could. The rest were nailed down to the joists underneath. Making as little noise as possible, he hadn't heard his parents go to bed yet, Omri pried up the short end of board. A hole, about 6 inches by 18, gaped in the light of the candle Patrick was holding. Even when he put the candle down the hole, they couldn't see much. We'll have to risk the bedside light, Omri said. They switched it on, carried it on its cord down the hole. Kneeling on the floor, they peered into the depths. They could make out the dusty lath and plaster about a foot down, the top side of the ceiling of the room below, the room where Omri's parents were now sitting. We'll have to be dead quiet, or they'll hear us. Dead quiet doing what? Asked Patrick. It's not there. You'd see it if it was. It must be under one of the nailed down boards, said Omri despairingly. At that moment, they heard Little Bear calling them, and they stood up. He was standing outside the longhouse, naked but for his breechcloth. His hair hung loose, his face and chest and arms were smeared with ashes, his feet were bare. Little Bear, what are you doing? Asked Omri, aghast at his appearance. Want fire, want make dance, call spirits, make Boone live. Omri looked at him for a moment and felt an ache in his throat that reminded him painfully of his babyish days, when he used to cry all the time, days he thought he had left behind forever. Little Bear, dancing won't do any good. The spirits won't help. We need a doctor. To get the doctor, we need the key. Would you help find it? Little Bear didn't move a muscle. I'd help. Gently, Omri picked him up. He knelt on the floor and put his hand down in the hole. Patrick held the light. Omri opened his hand and Little Bear stood on it, looking around into the dusty, dark tunnel stretching away under the floor. I think it's somewhere down there, Omri said quietly, on the other side of that wooden wall. You'll have to find a way through, a hole or crack or something. We'll give you all the light we can, but it's bound to be awfully dark on the other side. Do you think you can do it? I go, said Little Bear immediately. Right, start looking for a way through. Little Bear, a tiny, vulnerable figure, strode off through the dust into the darkness under the floor. Omri pulled the lampshade off the bedside lamp and thrust the bulb down into the hole. He couldn't get his head in to watch, and Little Bear went out of sight almost at once. Is there a way through? He whispered down the tunnel. Yes, came Little Bear's voice. Big hole. I go through. Omri, give light. Omri pushed the light down as far as he could, but the base of the lamp made it stick. Can you see anything? He whispered as loudly as he dared. There was no answer. He and Patrick knelt there for an age. There wasn't a sound. Then Patrick said suddenly, Did he take his bow and arrows? No. Why? What if he meets the rat? Omri had totally forgotten about the rat in the excitement of realizing what had happened to the key. Now he felt a strange jerk in his chest, as if his heart had hiccuped. He bent his head till his face was in the hole. He could smell the dust. The bright bulb was between him and the place where Little Bear had presumably gone, through a hole in the joist into the next section of the underfloor space. A hole. What could make a hole right through a joist? What else but a rat, gnawing away all day? A rat at this moment out on his night prowl. A hungry rat who hadn't eaten for 24 hours. A pink-eyed, needle-toothed, omnivorous giant rat. Little Bear, Omri called frantically into the darkness. Come back, come back. There was silence, and then he heard something. But it wasn't Little Bear's voice. It was the scuttering sound of a rodent's hard little hairless feet on lath and plaster. Little Bear! Omri! It was a voice from the room below. What are you doing up there? It was his mother. Then, quite distinctly, he heard his father's voice. I can hear that blasted rat pattering about overhead. It's probably keeping the boys awake. I'd better go up, said his mother. A door closed below, and they heard her coming up the stairs. Even this dire prospect hardly had power to do more than push Omri's desperation one stage farther. He probably wouldn't have moved from his place on the floor if Patrick hadn't acted swiftly. Quick, light off, into bed. He pulled Omri up, snatched the lamp out of his hand, and switched it off. The candle was still down the hole. Patrick shoved the floorboard roughly back into position and moved the carpet so that it more or less covered the boards if you didn't look closely. Then he pushed Omri into his bed, covered him up. Footsteps were nearly at the door, and had just flung himself down on the folding bed when the door opened. Omri laid there with his eyes squeezed shut, thinking, "Put the light on, don't put the light on." Light was coming into the room from the landing, but not enough to see anything much. His mother stood there for what seemed 100 years. Finally, she whispered, "Are you boys asleep?" Needless to say, she got no reply. "Omri," she tried once more. Then, after another 100 years, during which Omri imagined Little Bear bitten in half by the rat right underneath where he was lying, the door closed again, leaving them in darkness. That is the end of part 1.